for all your precious gifts. Receive my gratefulness.
Obviously, we were a little bit tired. We were good until Huey fell out of bed. We were real thud at 5 o'clock this morning. So the kids went back to sleep, but Kaz and I didn't. Yeah, he's fine. He's just got another lump to add to the other lumps. The one he got when the kid hit him with a bat, cricket the other day, and the one he got yesterday when I hit him in the head with a water slide. Fun and games. Let's pray. Get our heads in the game. Father God, thank you for this weekend. Thank you for the sunshine outside. Thank you for the chance now to sit under your word and think about what it says and how we might think well and creatively about what we do with those parts of the Bible in our Old Testament that maybe feel outside of our comfort zone or outside of our experience or outside of our application to us. Amen. Well, I love a sunburned country, land of sleeping plains, and drought and yeah, probably not loving it on the coast right now. Well, I love being Australian. I imagine you feel the same way. I love our countryside. I love our ruggedness. I love climbing the top of that water slide and looking out over the hills and the bush, thinking how good that is. But at another level, there's not a lot really that ties me to this place, other than being born here. That's one tie, and it being familiar. Being the Caucasian descendant of fairly recent European immigrants, I kind of feel like there are other places in the world where I could just pick up and drop myself and still feel kind of at home. Maybe feel familiar. The culture would be similar, the language will be the same. My dad comes from England. I can imagine I could easily live there if I wanted to. And so I think there's one level at which I probably have a slightly different feeling about this land than maybe some of our, Aboriginal friends who've retained closer ties to their cultural lands might. I also suspect I have a different feeling about my country than probably many American Christians feel about theirs. Those who sort of have a view that America is a particularly Christian country, a nation established by God as a sort of a new Christendom or a new Israel or something. And maybe those differences come from the settlement of those particular countries. With America settled by religious people trying to set up a clean, pure version of their religion away from prosecution in Europe, and Australia being a kind of dumping ground for criminals and reprobates. Maybe that makes a difference. If you just answer them, they might go away. Nathan Carter, get out!
Usually it's a keyboard, it's a culprit.
And it's hard to look cool playing the keyboard.
Yeah,
The third of Chris Wright's angles as we look at Old Testament ethics is the economic angle. And when discussing this third point of the triangle, Wright focuses mainly on the idea of land as the kind of focus of the Old Testament ethic of economics. And he says that the state of the promised land can be seen as a kind of gauge for where Israel sits in the other two angles. So if Israel is in the land and the land is flourishing, then you can make a reasonably safe assumption that their relationship with God is good and their social relationships are okay. But if the land is suffering, if they're being persecuted by other nations, if they've been exiled somewhere else, then you can safely assume, as you read the Bible, that Israel's relationship with God is fractured and their relationships with each other likewise aren't doing well. But I think of the three angles, this one is probably hardest for us as Christians, this side of Jesus, to get our heads around, because we are not people who are bound to a land. You can be a Christian outside of Australia, I could go back to England and still be a Christian, although there seems to be a diminishing mob over there, right? Likewise, in any other country around the world, you will find some people to go to church with and fellowship with. We're not bound to a land, to a temple, to a particular city or place, to an artifact of our faith set up in a temple somewhere. And that's what all the nations had, in the pre-Christian world, wasn't it? Homelands that they were bound to by belief and by the artifacts of their faith. That's why in the Old Testament the Israelites continually encounter these statues of Baal, these Asherah poles. When the ark gets captured by the Canaanites, you remember, they drag it off, the Philistines rather, they drag it off back to Philistia, and they set up the ark in front of the statue of their god Dagon, who in the morning they wake up and they find that he's fallen over in front of the ark. And then the next morning, after they've put him back, he's fallen down and his heads and his hands have fallen off as well. Everyone has the statue, everyone has a temple, everyone has a place where their religion and their faith is centred, except seemingly for the Israelites, who do have the tabernacle, but it goes around from place to place. Eventually they'll build a temple. But I just finished watching the SBS series Vikings. You know, watch Vikings? No? Only I'm alone in enjoying people having their heads cut off with axes or something. Last Kingdom. Watch Last Kingdom as well. Like all that stuff. But one of the big questions that the Vikings keep asking, in that series at least, and probably in real life, but one of the questions they keep asking as they travel to England, as they make their way into Russia and Europe and eventually to the far north of America, is, are our gods here? Like the gods of Scandinavia, Odin and Thor and Frey, are they also in these foreign places? Do they come with us? Are they here? And if they are here, are they as strong or stronger than the gods who are already here? Because they expect when they meet other people that they will have gods as well, and as much as there is a competition of armies, there will be a competition of gods over the land, who will rule it. And it does seem that that's one of the thoughts that the Israelites had as they moved into the promised land. Is it? Can Yahweh deliver us in this new land? Because it already has gods. And so yes, he brought us out of Egypt, he triumphed over their weird animal-headed gods, but the gods here seem to be doing pretty well, because when we sent spies into the land, it was pretty fruitful. Right? And Baal's a fertility god, seems to be making the people... You don't remember how huge the guys were that we saw there? Like, they must have a big god if they have such big guys. Right? And big grapes. Right? Remember the story of them bringing back some grapes on a pole and how big the bunch was? If they can bring about harvests like this, the gods that belong to this land, the gods that live in the hills and the caves and the rivers, if they can make it as fertile as this, can our God really triumph over them? You can imagine them thinking that way. And so maybe it wouldn't hurt to throw them a bone as well. Like, we can still be the people of Yahweh, but it wouldn't hurt, would it, just to go up to the high places and leave some sacrifices on that hill to Moloch? Right? Or if we've just conquered this town and got rid of the people who used to live it, but they were followers of Asherah, well, she is the local goddess, and if we don't put something near the altar, maybe she'll get upset and something bad will happen to our babies or something, so we'll have our God and leave a little bit for them as well. 2 bob each way, It's I think it's assuredly one of the reasons the Israelites participated in those rituals. Most of us, though, I don't think have the same connection to the land, right? Even the land where we live. Because we pick up, we sell our houses and we move. Not many of us actually continue to remain in the place that we were born, tied closely to that town or that village or that piece of property. We move cities for a job, to be closer to someone we like. We move countries for an adventure or an opportunity. But the Israelites had a much closer connection. The land in the Old Testament is not a neutral stage on which all their adventures play out. It's a big part of the story. It's an important part of the narrative. There are, apparently, I'm trusting someone else at this point because I didn't go and count them, but there are apparently 46 references to the promises that God made to Abraham in Genesis through to the conquest, to Joshua, Judges. 46 references to land, offspring, blessing. Of the 46 promises, only 7 of them don't mention the land. So 39 out of the 46 directly mention that one of the promises to Abraham, the promise, is land. Of those 39, 29 of them only mention the land. So it's almost as if, in the opinion of the writers of the Old Testament, the promise of the land kind of encapsulates everything that God was speaking to Abraham. It's synonymous. You can say the promise to Abraham of land and know that it means the other things as well. With that comes offspring and blessing of the nations. Which kind of means that the social shape of Israel is bound up in how they live in the land. How they are as a nation, socially, in their relationships, is bound up in how they live in the land. Let's look at a passage that'll hopefully make clearer some of the things I'm talking about. We're going to look at Deuteronomy 26. Deuteronomy 26. You can look it up on your phone now that we've solved the Nathan issue. The keyboard issue. Because it's not your phone making the noises. Sorry, Nathan, it's just a joke. It's all right. Don't blame you. You'll be reminded as you look up Deuteronomy that the very words Deuteronomy mean the second law, and it sets us up for the idea that Moses is here reading all the law that was given in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers to a new generation, the children that were born during the 40 years of wandering in the desert before they entered the promised land. They hadn't necessarily heard all these things, and so to get them ready for life in the land, he reads the law to them a second time. And here in verse 20, chapter 26, he describes a ritual for the Israelite farmer. So when you get in the land and you receive the first of your crops as a farmer, here is what you are to do. When you've entered the land the Lord your God is giving, is verse 1, as an inheritance, and have taken possession of it and settled in it. Take some of the first fruits of all that you produce from the soil of the land the Lord your God is giving you, and put them in a basket. Then go to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, and say to the priest in office at the time, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come to the land the Lord swore our ancestors to give us. And the priest, and he's kind of saying at that point, he said that God has fulfilled his promise. I have come to the land that God swore to give us. The priest shall take the basket from your hands and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. And then you shall declare before the Lord your God. So here's their liturgy, like we read those black parts in the thing before. This is what they're reading. My father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down into Egypt with a few people, and he lived there. He became a great nation, powerful and numerous. But the Egyptians mistreated us and made us suffer, subjecting us to harsh labour. And then we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our misery, toil, and oppression. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terror and with signs and wonders. And he brought us to this place, and he gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now I bring the first fruits of the soil that you, Lord, have given me. Place the basket before the Lord your God and bow down before him. And then you and the Levites and the foreigners residing among you shall rejoice in all the good things the Lord your God has given to you and your household. My dad was homeless. But not me, not my dad. Right? But that's effectively what he's saying. My dad was came on a boat, paid £10, got on a boat from London and sailed here. He lived in a resettlement camp, but wasn't homeless. But it's essentially what the Israelite farmer is being asked to acknowledge, isn't it? as he comes with his basket of produce from the land that he's been given, that his father was a wandering Aramean, that is, without land, without a land of their own. We didn't come from here, from this place. We're not responsible for the fruitfulness that we find here. We didn't plant the trees. We didn't dig the wells. Half the time we didn't even build the houses. We only have this, it's saying. And you'll notice it's not just plural, it's singular. I bring the first fruits. It's not just we, but I only have this produce that I'm bringing because Yahweh our God gave it to us. Communal and individual, to us and to me, everything good comes from the Lord, it says. Because the Israelites aren't sons of the soil. Their presence in the land is only because Yahweh has given it to them. That's why I keep saying over and over, you'll notice it repeated, the land the Lord your God is giving you. The land the Lord your God is... It doesn't just say the land the Lord your God is giving you. Rejoice in the good things the Lord your God has given you. Repeated and repeated so they wouldn't forget. God gave it as a gift, unmerited, in fulfillment of his promise. Not because you remember Deuteronomy 7 says they were more numerous than the other peoples. It says you were the fewest of all the peoples. Not because of their wealth or their economic superiority in Deuteronomy 8. It says you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he that gives you the ability to produce wealth. It's not because there's many of them. It's not because they're strong or smart. It's not even because they got the social angle of our triangle right, that they were righteous and just. Because in Deuteronomy 9, I like this way it's laid out, Deuteronomy 7, 8, 9, just compiles these things. You ought not think that. Oh, it's not that either. It's not that. It's not. It crosses off everything that they might think is a reason for them to have been given this. But in Deuteronomy 9, verse 5, it says, it is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of their land. None of those things. It's only because God gives it to them. Now, if you're a parent or have been a parent, then there's a chance that you have a stash of things like these in your house. This is a block of wood. It's been painted and has a peg on it for holding things. It says, home is wherever Dad is. It sits next to my bed, my bedside table. And clipped to it is this little packet of pretend McDonald's French fries. It says, Dad, you are, the idea being that one of my children has written things that they think I am. And if I feel a little bit down, I can pull out, Dad, you are strong. Dad, you are gentle. Dad, you are a board game genius. Dad, you are generous and clam. My children get their spelling from their mother. Generous and calm. Those things are kind of heartwarming, right? And one of the things that I really like is I'll go away on a work trip, I'll come back home, even if it's the first night away, you only left in the morning, if I ring home, the kids all want to tell me about their day on the phone. And if it's longer, if it's an overnight trip or a couple of nights, you pull in the driveway and I can hear them in the car, inside the house, yelling, Dad's home, and they all come piling out the front door. And that's lovely, and it's a wonderful feeling, right? And it's why you keep little gifts like that. Because, there's no real financial worth to that. Eventually it will find itself into a bin somewhere, like when we move house or whatever. But they remind you of moments like that. And so it would be wrong to take these gifts that the kids have invested time or money or just choosing into and despoil them or break them or receive it and throw it away. Or for someone else to come and take them. Keep your hands off my French fries, Jace. Right? Those words are about me. He's clamming up. Right? It's because if I care for them, they will be a continued blessing to me. I can look at all the time and be reminded of that relationship. And as God's divine gift, the land for Israel was the same. It was, as they looked around, as they walked on it, as they enjoyed its produce, a tangible reminder of their relationship with their God. Because we only have it because God has given it to us. We only have it, because God has given it to us. That's a monkey. And so many of the laws of the Old Testament are predicated on Israel entering and then caring for the land. So the law starts with when you enter. When you enter. It's not just here you are, here's some laws, but when you go in, then you do it. And so much on the other side, so much of the prophetic anger from the back half of the Old Testament is directed at abuse of the land. So if you want to find Micah in the back of your Bible, Micah chapter 2. Last book in the Old Testament, Micah chapter 2.
Where is it?
If you find names you recognise, Matthew, Mark, normal kind of names, you've gone too far. If you're still in the weird names, Nahum, Obadiah, Zephaniah, you're somewhere close. Right, so Micah chapter 2, verse 1. Woe to those who plan iniquity, and to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning's light they carry it out, because it is in their power to do it. How do they do that? How do they do evil? They covet fields and seize them. Sounds like Ahab yesterday, right? They covet fields and seize them, and houses, and take them. They defraud people of their homes, and rob them of their inheritance. And their inheritance is the land. Or go back a couple of books to Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 5. Not too much flipping to do, but a little bit. It's worth seeing it. Isaiah chapter 5 from verse 7. It says, the vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel. And passages are like this are why when Jesus gives the parable of tenants, he says there's a vineyard and the tenants are there and they collect the harvest, and he sends a servant to go and collect his portion of the harvest, and they mistreat the servant and all that. That parable comes from things like this, where Israel is described as the vineyard of the Lord Almighty. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. He looked for justice and saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field, till no space is left and you live alone in the land. And it's the idea that one person, as they accumulate wealth and power, buys their neighbour's house and buys their other neighbour's field, and then buys the one next to that, and eventually they're the only person living in anywhere in the land they can see around them, because they've bought all the rest of the stuff and kicked everybody else out. Because more than just an economic issue, losing your land for the Israelites was a deeply spiritual issue. Right? It's why our Aboriginal Australians or the Indigenous peoples of South Africa feel so disinherited from things, because when we settled it, not you, I know it's not you, but communally speaking, us white fellas, when we went and took their land, we kicked them off their spiritual homelands. Not just the place where they had a house or a cow, but the place where they were deeply settled and rooted in. And we took all those Zulus and Xhosa and all the rest, and we shoved them in little bits where they didn't belong in some other bloke's country. Picked them up and put them in somebody else's scrappy backyard. Said, you can go and live there now, it's just the same as yours, it's a piece of dirt. But for them it wasn't a piece of dirt. And for the Israelites, losing your land was a deeply spiritual issue. If you didn't have access anymore to the land that God had given your family, did you even have a relationship with God? It's why the book of Ruth makes so much of that idea of the kinsman redeemer. Thank God there is some bloke, we don't know him very well, right? He's a distant relative, but thank God there is some bloke who might be able to come in and help us keep this land in our family and give us descendants of the same family, the same name. Because otherwise, who are we in Israel? Do we even belong if we don't have our bit anymore? And the other thing that the outrage of the prophets recognises for us is that although the promised land is God's divine gift to Israel, it's never theirs exclusively. That is, it remains His. It's His land that they get to live in. It's under divine ownership. So Leviticus 25:23 is the simplest expression of this. Leviticus 25:23 says, "The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you reside in it as foreigners and strangers." Yahweh says to people, it's mine, and you're there as foreigners and strangers. It's not yours. You can't just sell it as you want it. You can't do whatever you want with it. It's mine. And maybe you've had that experience. Maybe you've been a tenant. Maybe you've rented a property from someone else. It's not yours. That relationship comes with both rights and responsibilities, doesn't it? You have the right to working services and the ability and to be able to live safe in a secure and quiet environment that is managed according to local laws. That's what it says on the tenancy website. Right? But you have responsibilities too, to pay your rent on time, to take good care of the property, to replace that dead tree that's not really dead, it's not really your fault because there's a drought. What are you supposed to do? Come on, it's not fair. You know what? Israel's relationship with the land was similar. Right? If Yahweh ultimately owned the land, then no Israelite was at liberty to just buy and sell as they want, or take somebody else's land, or take some other Israelite. They were all equally tenants under the same arrangement. And so it came both as a divine gift and with rights and responsibilities to the one who ultimately owned it. It came with responsibilities to God, didn't it? Like the tithes, the Jubilee year, the festivals. It came with responsibilities to one family. The idea of keeping that land in the family. The idea of the kinsman redeemer. Even the really foreign idea for us of levirate marriage. You know the idea that if there's an older brother and he gets married and he dies before his wife has a child to inherit the property, then the younger brother is meant to marry her and have a child and name it after his brother, kind of thing, to keep their family. That really weird and foreign idea that we kind of go, not cool with that, right? That is there because of this, of family responsibilities in the land. And one had responsibilities to their neighbours as well, to respect boundary markers, to look after other people's animals, like that passage we looked at on the first night, to pay workers fairly, to allow the poor to glean in the field. So all these responsibilities come from the fact that the land is God's, not theirs. And there's also a need, like we've been looking at, for Israel to be a light to the nations, for them to be distinct in their economic ethics as well as their social ethics, in the way that they use the land and by extension their money as well. I don't know if you get them too, maybe you live far enough out of town not to, but we and Margaret moving into town, maybe you'll start to get them. Welcome to this, but we very regularly get young people, sometimes young foreigners, but obviously young backpackers, turning up on our doorsteps with official identification from charities asking us to join up to their fundraising. Last week it was for strokes. The week before was breast cancer. We've had heart disease this year and the Royal Life-Saving Society and a couple more that I can't remember, right? There's at least one every fortnight. And they come to the door and they have a spiel and I let them give their spiel. I want to hear about their good cause. And I say that, look, yeah, tell me about it. But I also have a script that I give back to them. Because nobody takes $10 anymore. If they just wanted $10, I would give them $10 and would say off here. But they want an ongoing subscription for $20 or $30 or $50 a month, right? And so I say, and I'm not lying when I say this, and I'm not trying to blow anyone's trumpet saying this, right? I just say, look, we're a Christian family and we believe in helping out those who are less fortunate than us. And I see that your cause is a good one. But you're one of dozens of good causes that turn up every couple of months to talk to us, right? And so we've picked a few things and occasionally we'll change those things because we can't give to everybody. So we have a sponsor child and we give to our local Red Cross and we give to a group called Open Doors and we give to Save the Children and we support our local scripture board. And once we get to 5 or 6 of those things, they kind of go, oh, okay. Maybe I'll go next door and ask them, right? And I don't say that because we're particularly good or anything. Like, we've been blessed, and I think it's our responsibility to give that back. But it is to say that the economics of both Old and New Testaments do have the ethics of those testaments do have an economic angle, right? Like, what God cares what we do with our money. But we're not bound to land like the Israelites were. We're bound to a person, to Jesus Christ. And so in any of kind of Graham Goldsworthy's God's people in God's land under God's rule, like once you get to Jesus, the land kind of disappears. It continues to be Jesus and wherever his people are gathered. So what do we do with this stuff that we've been talking about, right? Is it just we get to the Gospels and then we can forget about the land bit? Well, let's see what Chris Wright says. In his book, he wants to tell us that actually the wrong question is to ask, how do we apply this to ourselves? He wants to say that we jump too quickly to asking, what does this mean for me? He says our tendencies are either to insert ourselves into an Old Testament text. So we read David and Goliath and we go, well, I'm like David. What are the stones that I collect and who is the giant that I have to destroy? Right? You might have heard that kind of thing. Or we go, well, actually, all we can do with the Old Testament is draw out principles. So we read David and Goliath and go, well, what is the principle that I can draw out? If I have enough faith, I can destroy the giants in my life. But then you don't need the David and Goliath story, right? Because once you've got the principle, once you've got the lolly out of the wrapper, you don't keep the wrapper, you throw it away. So we don't really need the story if we can just get a principle that faith destroys giants, right? You wouldn't need the David and Goliath. You'd get rid of Samuel out of your Bible. Or if we're good evangelicals, we jump really quickly from David to David being a type of Jesus and Goliath being a type of sin and death and the devil, right? And talk about the cross. So he thinks a better option for us, and eventually we want to get there because that's true, right? We don't want to ignore that, but he thinks a better option for us when we look at the Old Testament in general and the Old Testament ethics in particular is to think about the society and the laws of Israel as paradigms. Paradigms. I don't know if anyone is familiar, or particularly familiar with paradigms in any sense of what you do for work or what you've studied or whatever, but a paradigm is a model or a pattern that has worked in one circumstance that you can then kind of pick up and apply to other circumstances to see if it will work the same. And they have paradigms in medicine. You know, like one drug works to treat a particular disease, then they might go, well, let's pick it up and try and apply it to a different disease and see how it works. Have paradigms in science and engineering. You know, like if we can use this formula to try and solve this issue, this problem, then maybe the same formula will apply to this slightly different problem as well. The place that I'm most familiar with paradigms is in language learning. Right? So when you turn up at, it's not apparent in English, right? So you know, if you've learned English like we have, it doesn't work because English is like they took 3 or 4 languages and grabbed like bits of them and put them in a bag and shook them up like a jigsaw and then just dumped it out on the table and see what would happen, right? English doesn't work because you think about it. We have a paradigm that says if you break down or if you do big, right, and then bigger than that is bigger, and then the biggest one is biggest, big, bigger, biggest, and small, smaller, smallest, and gooder and goodest, right? It doesn't. There are places where the paradigms break down because they don't come from the same language family. Or think about irregular plural nouns. You know what I'm talking about, right? Irregular plural nouns are nouns that don't get an S on the end when you pluralise them. So you have one dog, many dogs. One chair, many chairs. One dance, many dances. One child, many childs. No children. Right? One person, many persons kind of works, but people is the plural noun we use, right? One tooth, many. Oh, so that's stupid. Like that doesn't make any sense compared to the rest of them, right? Should be teeths. Why isn't it teeths? But if you're learning biblical Greek, as an example, like Simon and I had to do, poorly, you'll learn paradigms. The very first couple of weeks you're there, you'll learn logo, logu, logo, logos, logu, logo, logon, right? And you'll learn to decline, and you'll learn that pretty much every other regular masculine second declension noun follows the same pattern. So if you're looking and you read the word for law, nomos, it will go nomos, nomu, nomo, nomon, right? And then it'll have plural versions of those things. And you learn 437 of those stinking paradigms, and apparently you can read the New Testament. German's the same. Eine, except you have to say it like that. Like you're angry, with a mouthful of marbles. So what Chris Wright thinks is that rather than rushing to kind of apply the Old Testament passage to ourselves, I'll quote a bit from him so that you hear it directly. But as we speak about Israel and the Bible's reports of and its commentary on the life of Israel in the Old Testament, he says, by seeing how they addressed within their historical and cultural context problems and issues common to humanity, whether in principle or in practice, we are helped to address, if not always solve, the ethical challenges we face in our different contexts. Because a paradigm has problem-solving power. Let me read that again. He says, by seeing how they, that's the Israelites, addressed within their cultural and historical context problems and issues common to humanity, whether in principle or in practice. So he's saying there that sometimes there's principles laid down that it doesn't appear that they practiced. So that law about the Jubilee, every 50 years, slaves being set free, debts being cancelled, it may have happened, but we don't have any real solid evidence, like historical evidence, to say that they ever went through with that process. So there's a principle there, if not a practice.
So whose quote is that?
This is Chris Wright, the guy who's put the triangle together. Yep. So he says, by seeing how they address within their cultural and historical context problems and issues common to humanity in principle or in practice, we are helped to address, if not always solve, the ethical challenges we face in our different contexts. A paradigm has problem-solving power. And another writer, and this is interesting because we were talking around the fire on the first night, and we were talking about that passage about if your enemy's ox or donkey or whatever, you find it running loose, you should take it back to him. And a few people looked about that. And I was thinking, I don't know if I said it at the time, but I was thinking, that's fairly concrete. What if your enemy loses a shirt instead of an ox or a donkey? Are you free from that law? If there's not a law that talks about it being like, if your enemy loses their computer, should you return it? It's not an ox or a donkey, right? But there's another writer, John Goldingay, who then encourages us not to be put off by this particularly concrete nature of the Old Testament. And he takes a law like that from Deuteronomy 22. It's actually the one not about enemies but about Israelites. The same as the other one though. He says, if you see your brother Israelite's ox or sheep straying, do not ignore it. Make sure you return it to your brother. Right? So basically the same thing except about someone closer to you than an enemy. Right? If you see their ox or sheep straying, do not ignore it. Make sure you return it to your brother. See, we can be tempted to ignore it if we live in town and we don't know anyone with ox or sheep. Right? We can be tempted to ignore it if we realise we're not Israelites. Okay? But he says, either the Bible statements tell us how to live, on one hand, some of them do, or when they do not do this, the actual statements are the model for and the measure of our attempts to state how we are to live. This means we do not ignore the particularity of biblical commands and apply them to our own day as if they were timeless universal. So he says the laws are very particular, but it doesn't mean you have to pick them up and put them in your situation as if they're kind of a timeless thing that you always have to do. So we don't bring animals to church anymore and have Simon kill them for us. Okay? Right? That's a very particular outworking of a thing. Right? And he says, but nor are we paralysed by their particularity and thus unable to apply them to our day as well. So there are things we do bring to church and give to Simon, right? Or the parish council or whoever it is. We do make an offering, right? It's just not an unblemished lamb, right? Or a bull or whatever. So he says sometimes we ought to rejoice, is how he finishes this. We ought to rejoice in their particularity because it shows us how the will of God was expressed in their context, and we then take them as our paradigm for our own ethical construction. Not that it's binding on us, but that we can think about how we live and how we respond to God and how we do life together using those things as it's more than guidelines, it's less than rules. It's a paradigm. It's a pick it up. It worked in this instance. Pick it up and see if it fits. Right? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. That's his thing. That is, we're not bound to return only the livestock of Israelites, nor are we free from helping our neighbours if they're not farmers. What we can do, though, is be glad that we follow a God who cares so much about people that he would have us return their lost property. Even the lost property of an enemy. That's what that verse in Exodus says. We can be thankful for this negative law, and the negative is don't ignore it, because the negative actually protects a positive. It says that everybody's property is still theirs and ought to be given back to them. It protects a good. Even lost property should be returned and respected. And I think you can hear the words of Jesus in that too, can't you? In Luke he says, as he's critiquing the Pharisees for kind of bad-mouthing his disciples for doing something on the Sabbath, he says, which of you whose son or whose ox falls into a well will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? So they're religiously bound up in the Sabbath law, can't do anything, sorry, because it belongs to someone else. Like John's sheep is in the well. He's like, I need help pulling my sheep out. And they're like, it's the Sabbath, can't help you. But John wants to pull it out, and Jesus says to them, you pull out your own one, go and help the other fellow. And we do this, I think, like you might be thinking, oh, I don't know about this, and at some levels, like this is not my favourite way of approaching the Old Testament necessarily, right? It's one model, it's one way of doing it. And you might think, oh, I don't know, this is all a bit dodgy in the Old Testament. But we do it with Jesus as well, this paradigm approach. Right? So take the parable of the Good Samaritan that Jesus gives. That one is really familiar, right? At the end of the parable of the Good Samaritan, what does Jesus say to the crowd? Now you go and do likewise. Does that mean find a naked man in the road, bandage up his wounds, put him on your donkey, take him to the inn, pay the innkeeper 2 coins in order to keep him, and promise to come back and pay more later on? Does it? No, of course it doesn't, right? That's dumb. Okay? It's a paradigm. It's a situation that he describes that you can pick up, a model that you can pick up and move and put it in a situation that you face and see if it fits. It's not just a principle, right? It's more than that. It says, so we kind of think about what Jesus did and then put ourselves in the situation that we face and imagine what Jesus might do because of what we know about what he's like and what he did, and then see if that helps us work out how to be Christ-like in that situation. And so, I don't have any more answers, right? But given that the Old Testament makes up 2/3 of our Bible, like if you open it up, chances are 66% of the time you're going to land in the Old Testament. We ought to figure out how to read it well. We ought to figure out what to do with it, how to make the best of it. And while there are other ways of thinking about Old Testament ethics, I think Chris Wright's little triangle about thinking about God in the theological ethic, thinking about how we live as a society, how we interact with others in the social ethic, and then thinking about economics, about how we spend our resources, realising that God has given us all of it and has kind of demands on us because of that, then that actually helps us approach any Old Testament passage you read, because we can open up, those things that we got on Friday now and read them again and go, well, if I looked at that through the three lenses of that triangle, not in isolation, but as it sits within the Old Testament, would I get a different answer? Or would the answer that I have now be a better one, or a fuller one, or a more helpful one than the one I had on Friday night? I'm going to leave it there. I'm sure you have questions. That's okay. I still have questions. But I hope that has been a helpful exercise in looking at some of the Old Testament for the weekend. So let's pray. Father God, we do thank you for our Old Testament. We thank you that even though there are some strange things in it which are difficult for us to understand, Peter writes the same thing about Paul's letters in the New Testament. And it just means that we need to do the work. We need to be willing to put time and energy into thinking about who you are as our God and the way that you would have us live individually, as a community, in the world, and to think about how we use the things that you have given us. So thank you for this weekend. We thank you for the chance to think about these things. We pray that this would not be the end of it, but that we might be willing to exercise our minds in digging the rich gold that is to be found in our Old Testament and in those ethical sections of it that told the Israelites how to live, and that can be helpful for us in providing us wisdom in how we live as your people in the world now. Amen.